Hi, my name is Justin Leopard. Welcome to Consordini. I'm Justin Leopard, professional cellist in Los Angeles, and today we're going to go over basic setup with the cello. Perhaps you're a young student looking for some initial advice. Perhaps you're an older person who tried to start cello, which is an awesome thing to start. And in any case, a lot of the basics are the same, so we're just going to kind of go over those. Starting with the chair. So you want a chair that's going to allow you to comfortably have your feet flat on the floor. And you don't want it to be so short that your knees are above your waist. This chair that I'm on right now would be the lower end of the spectrum for somebody my size. And it could even work to have a chair where my knees were a little angled more like that. Especially for young students, sometimes finding a chair that meets those requirements can be a little harder. And so having a short stool, especially one that's adjustable, is a really easy solution for that. The other basic posture thing, and we're going to go over posture before the cello, even though it doesn't really relate to anything yet. But the other basic posture thing is that you don't want to be slouched back in your seat, and you also don't want to overcompensate by trying to bring your chest too far forward. The basic metric for determining whether you're sitting correctly is whether you feel like the only difference between sitting and standing is that your legs are bent. So if I stand up straight and I bring everything down but my torso is the same and I allow everything to rest comfortably on my hips, this is the side view, this is going to allow me to freely play without hurting myself, which is actually a big concern going into cello, and a lot of these things that we go over today actually are as much about protecting you as helping you play well. Because when you play the cello, it's not only a lot of exertion, especially when you get to practicing several hours a day or rehearsing even more hours than that, it's also an imbalanced exertion. If you do yoga, you're going to do the same exercises symmetrically, but when you play cello, you have one hand up here, you have another hand down here, and that can create all sorts of issues when you're doing it every single day. And this can be a real problem. Some people have to stop playing for years because of injuries they get. So the basic thing about getting a chair that's going to allow your legs to sit correctly, and that's going to allow your torso to sit correctly. And this is the basic posture that we're always going to use with cello. Okay, so what do you need? At this point, maybe you're just investigating, or maybe you already have rented a cello or bought a cello. In that case, you probably will have your cello, a bow, and you'll also need rosin, which you might have gotten in the form of some sort of stick, but it's better if you can get what we call cake rosin, because this is going to allow you to change the angle as you're rosining. We'll show you when we rosin, but it's going to be better in the long term for you. And you also need a cleaning cloth, because the rosin that we use, which is basically the same as tree resin, can easily fall on your instrument. And with these instruments, there are a lot of weather sensitive issues. One of which is that the glue that's used to hold it together is actually not that strong of glue. And the reason for that is that if something happens, we want the cello to fall apart rather than break, because it's relatively easy for somebody who knows what they're doing to re-glue a seam. And never re-glue yourself, because these glue specificity requirements are actually very important, and it's not something that just normal wood glue is going to do, even though that might seem like, oh, it's wood and it should work. So let's take a look at the cello. Maybe you already know these things, but it's nice to go over the different parts. We have, of course, the strings, A, D, G, C are their note names. They are supported by a bridge. The bridge is typically made of balsam wood, which is very flexible. So when temperatures change, it's actually the bridge changing more than the cello changing that's going to cause some pitch things. And it's not actually glued on or anything. It's just supported by the tension of the strings, which are tens of pounds of tension. So a lot of tension from these metal strings. The strings themselves typically have some sort of core with wrapping. So it's a little different than guitar strings, which are sometimes just a stretch of metal or just nylon. Down here we have fine tuners. And up here we have the large tuners. And these can be quite finicky if you haven't already taken some time to explore. If your cello is disastrously out of tune, you'll need to use them. And the most simple way to tune with one of these is to turn the cello towards yourself. And when you go down in pitch, you're going to rotate towards yourself. And this is true for all of them. You can hear this pitch down. And as you go up, you just want to push in at the same time. So I'm pushing in. That'll allow me to let go, and it won't spiral back. Sometimes they fall out of place because these are also only held in by friction, tension between the wood. And all of these things are part of why, these are very, very special instruments that require a lot of skill to make, as opposed to machine-made instruments. A lot of the features of this instrument are craftsmanship. And that's one of the lovely things about them and why they get such a wondrous, beautiful tone. This is the front of the instrument. It's a softer wood than the back of the instrument. Inside, we have a sound post that goes from the top to the bottom. So sound will initially start from the string. It'll vibrate the bridge, which will vibrate the front of the cello, which will go through the sound post, vibrate the back of the cello, and resonate in between both as a chamber coming out the F-holes and also the instrument itself. So this is how the cello produces sound. And the first time you pick it up, it's not going to be set up already. I'd already set up the end pin. It'll be inside, and if you're in a really unusual circumstance, you'll have an old-fashioned stick-in end pin, but the overwhelming majority of you are already going to have one of these fastened wrench-based end pins. And there are a couple of ways to determine the length of the end pin. But what you want to be able to achieve is an angle that allows you to comfortably play the instrument. If it's too high like this, it might be easier to see where some of the notes are, but you're going to run into a lot of problems with the bow. And the opposite is true if it's too tall, where it might be a little bit easier to do some bow things, but you're going to find it quite awkward to navigate the instrument, especially as you're practicing your scales going up. So I think it's about 30 degrees angle. You don't want it to be 45, unless you might see some people do that, but that's a different approach. The majority of us are doing this like 30-degree angle. So one approach you can use just initially is to set the cello like this, find that 30-degree angle, find where it sits against the middle of your chest, not your solar plex, but a little bit higher than that. You want it to rest comfortably in between your knees without squeezing it in place. And if you have a friend, you can have them let go of the end pin and it'll fall to the floor. But if it's just you, you'll just have to experiment a little bit. Maybe if this feels a little too high, go down, reset it just a very tiny bit. And when you first get this set up, you want to maybe just move with it a little bit. When I move back and forth like this, the cello can move with me, and it's not because I'm holding the cello, it's just because the cello is relaxed against my body. And no matter what I do, the cello is a part of me. And that's a really important part of this, because you're kind of playing the cello from behind, as opposed to a piano where you're playing in front of it. With this instrument, it's projecting away from us. So we really want to feel like we're moving with it, like a dance partner, when we play it. Okay, so we're going to set the cello away for a second. Oh, actually, I had forgotten I brought up rosin and temperature. And the important thing about having a cleaning cloth is that rosin, and actually there's a little bit of rosin on my cello now, melts at only about 100 degrees. So if the cello is allowed to sit with rosin on it, it's very easy for the varnish and the rosin to actually melt together and cause a goop that, best case scenario, just isn't that harmful, but worst case scenario is something where you have to have a luthier take off those layers of varnish and revarnish it, and this is hundreds of dollars. So you really want to avoid that. So have a cleaning cloth. This is actually just a kitchen cloth because they're a little bit more abrasive. Some people use a lighter cloth, but the varnish itself is pretty strong. You just want something that's going to be able to take away the rosin, and also especially from the strings and also the wood of your bow. So speaking of the bow, let's go to the bow and talk about rosining. So like I said, the rosin is from trees. It's basically the same as resin. And what's cool about using the bow is a very special device, because a lot of other instruments have just a single attack. If you hit a piano key, it's hitting a hammer that hits a string, and there's just this point of attack and decay. But with a bow, you're able to get something a lot more like breathing, because there are actually microscopic hooks in the horsehair. We use horsehair on these bows that will continuously grab the string, and that's what gives the cello its really unique full sound and the ability to do swells and all sorts of really beautiful things. But the hooks themselves are kind of soft. So even though there are these hooks in there, they are not intrinsically going to grab the string without the assistance of something sticky like the rosin. So if you do get a cake rosin, what's nice about that is that as you're rosining, you can rotate it. And that way you won't get a consistent groove. You can see mine, it's worn away in the middle, but there's not a consistent groove. If you get one of those stick rosins, you'll get a consistent groove, and then you'll end up rosining more of just the edges of the bow than the center, which mostly you're playing in the center, so that's not as useful. Sometimes you'll see people rosin overhand like this, but in my experience, you're gonna get a much better rosin by resting the bow on your knee, holding the rosin, and there's just 3 steps to doing it. The first step is you wanna just do these little short motions all the way down, and notice that I'm rotating the cake as I'm doing it. This is what's helping keep it even. And I just go up and down once. And then, this is a little trickier, but it's really not too bad. Then you want to go side to side. And this is just helping make sure that hairs that are overlapping with each other or anything like that are getting the rosin. And then the final thing is just to do a few big sweeps. That helps make sure that the rosin's even. One of the reasons that people most need bow rehairs, and you're going to need a rehair, that even if you don't break any hairs, the hairs go bad, and it's really important to have healthy hair. But one of the reasons that people will break hairs the quickest is over rosining, and this just adds so much weight and stickiness and problems. You just want to rosin the right amount to get a good sound and to not need to rehair too much. Okay, so we've talked about what type of chair you might need and basic posture, setting up the end pin, different parts of the cello, and how to rosin the bow. So that brings us almost to the end of this video, and I'd like to leave you with your first homework assignment. Maybe you have a teacher, and if not, I would highly recommend finding somebody who knows how to teach, because again, these are incredibly complicated instruments, and you can find out a lot on your own, but you're going to find out a lot more from somebody who's already studied how to use it correctly. But in the meantime, it's good to just try to practice getting your tone and getting your bow hold. So this is the final part of the video that we'll go over. You have the cello resting. It's comfortably between your knees without being tight. It's comfortably against your chest without being too high or too low. And the bow hold is going to be the trickiest part of all of this so far. So expect it to take a few weeks. If you're practicing a couple hours a day, expect it to take a few weeks to really find a comfortable bow hold. But your bow hold should be light and flexible. And that's the tricky part about it. You don't want to, you're definitely not going to grip it like this, and you don't want your fingers to be clamped on it. These aren't going to allow you to get a very vibrationous sound from it. What you want is to let your fingers fall just casually on the bow. And I put my middle finger right at the start of the frog. This thing down here is the frog. Right at the start of that, that's kind of how I line it up. First finger is on the grip here. Pinky's about at the tip, although hand size definitely plays a factor in this. And on the other side, you want to bring your thumb just into this crook here. Now, none of your fingers should be straight like this. You want a little bit of flexibility. You can see that with the same amount of tension as me just holding my hand here, I'm actually able to completely support the bow in my hand. And there are all sorts of different things you can try, from holding with 2 fingers, comparing that to other fingers. See, like that one's a little bit harder, so that helps you see which fingers do what in holding the bow up. And the other tricky thing is that your wrist isn't going to be straight when you play the cello. And this is because your arm is not straight compared to the fingerboard. If your arm were straight compared to the fingerboard, then your wrist could be straight, but you can see this is incredibly awkward. Because we have to bring our elbow in, we have to move our wrist so that our hand is still straight with the fingerboard. So you can see my hand is going out, my fingers are pointing to you, the fingerboard is going down, the strings are pointing to you, but it leaves my wrist what we call pronated, as opposed to supinated, and definitely not straight. So what you want to evaluate is if the bow is perpendicular to the strings. And if the bow is perpendicular to the strings, this is the correct way for your wrist to be. Definitely you want to be relaxed. You can already imagine if you're tight, practicing hours a day, and most of the time your wrist is bent, that's going to cause major, major problems. And tendonitis is a huge one, as is carpal tunnel. But you just, when you can find that relaxation point, you just want to experiment with getting a really nice sound from your open strings. And this is going to come from you assisting the cello, not forcing the cello, in resonating. Again, first from the string to the bridge, to the front, to the back, in between and out. The more relaxed you are, the bigger the sound you'll get, believe it or not. And so I'm just going to play a little bit of the C string to finish this video. I hope this video was really helpful for you, and you're able to get started with setting up the cello and experimenting with how to make some beautiful sounds with this instrument. I wish you all the best of luck in your journey studying cello, and I invite you to contact me with any questions if you would like to know more information from my point of view. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, my name is Justin Leppard, and this is coming to you from Consordini.com.